Welcome. My name is Joanne Richards, and I am going to be your host for News and Clues from Earth Defense Headquarters, my nonprofit based here in Northern California, north of San Francisco. And tonight we are going to be talking about the Knights of the Cold War. Who are they? Who are these heroes from the Cold War? Basically the two main men in my life. And so we'll just get started. And if I could have the picture of Rich, the man in the Air Force uniform, that would be great. So my father-in-law's name was Major Ellis Lloyd Richards, and his grandfathers were both involved with Nikola Tesla. One worked with Tesla on various projects, and well, they both worked with Nikola Tesla on various projects. Major Richards' father was Ellis Lloyd Richards Sr., and he was a brilliant electronics engineer. He worked on many think tanks. He worked closely with the president. And because of his connections with Tesla and different scientists, he was able to get his son to have different summer camps with exciting scientists with Tesla and with Goddard and with Hubble, and just fascinating experiences. And Rich, as he's known by, and his military nickname is the Dutchman, he spent incredible summers with these men, and he got to test various projects that Nikola Tesla was working on, like the death ray and just all kinds of stuff. And he grew up in Michigan, I believe. He went to school at Northwestern. He joined the Army Air Corps for World War II. He became a fighter. Well, he became a pilot, and he, as aircraft advanced, he became a fighter pilot and a test pilot for the Air Force. And he just had this incredible military career. But what a lot of people didn't know was that from the time he was a teenager, he was involved with all kinds of top secret missions and activities that his father would have been involved with. And he had been around aliens and just incredible secrets his whole life. And in fact, in the 30s, before Germany went to war, he was over in Europe for a wedding, I believe, and he was invited to Germany to check out all the cool secrets that the Nazis were developing, because they wanted him to defect and become a Nazi officer, and he politely declined, I'm sure, and took as many secrets with him as he could back to the United States. And he saw flying saucers, he saw jets they were working on, different aircraft, different ships. It's just incredible. And after World War II, he went in and out of the Air Force, but he was stationed all over the world, and usually he was stationed at places where there was UFO activity or conflicts with different alien species here on Earth. And I know that in 1959, he was stationed in Pakistan at a very top secret base, and for a while he was there maybe 6 months, and then I've learned that for about 12 months, he was off planet. And the whole time, Mark, my husband Mark, was about 5, 6, and he and his mom were basically, left home alone. But I mean, they had a lot of help, and they had a lot of friends, and their uncles had a lot of great connections. So they had some good experiences while their dad was gone. But of course, they missed him. And let's see. So Rich has flown all kinds of aircraft, and like I said, he was a test pilot for the Air Force, and he's been in different movies, like Howard Hughes did the movie Jet Pilot, and he and Chuck Yeager were flying new jets, like kind of as extras in the background. So that was fun for him. And in 1965 or 1966, he officially retired from the Air Force, and he took over a top secret agency called International Security. And this had been formed in 1947 by the United Nations, and Admiral Nimitz ran it until he died. And then Rich retired, officially from the Air Force, and he took over this International Security Force. And basically what it did was it took care of any threats on and off planet, and different countries would come together, different governments and militaries would come together to deal with different kinds of threats, whether it be aliens or drug trafficking or, you know, human trafficking. I'm not sure of everything they did, but they took care of a lot of things. And the agency was maybe 200 people at a time, but it was like, while the world thought we were all at the Cold War with each other, they were running this fabulous agency and doing all this James Bond kind of stuff, but, you know, saving humanity, basically, and just saving the earth many times from invasion attempts. Now, my husband, Mark, and if you'll show Mark the picture of the boy with the elemental on his shoulder. Mark was an incredible young man. He was born in 1953. Here in San Rafael, which is the next town over from where I live. And he grew up, you know, almost this magical life, I would say. You know, he was an only child. He, you know, had a wonderful, you know, grandmother that lived here with his family and helped him when he was little, took him for walks and, you know, taught him about all kinds of things magical. And, you know, Mark went to kindergarten here in first grade. And then in 1960, they moved to England, and they spent about 1.5 years there. His dad was stationed at RAF Croughton, which isn't far from, it's kind of between Oxford and Banbury. And it was basically, it looks like a bunch of antenna sticking up out of the ground. There's a lot of radar domes. It was a communication station. And again, everything his dad did was top secret and classified. And they lived in the town of Banbury for a while. Then they lived on base for a while. They lived in a safe house when they first got there. So at times, you know, when things got rough and scary, they had to move onto the base. And a couple years later, they moved to France, and they lived on base in France. And at that time, well, let's see, they lived in France. And part of the time, Mark's dad was working with the military intelligence part of NATO. And they were stationed at the Air Force Base in Lone. And then from there, in the middle 60s, they moved to Michigan, to K.I. Sawyer. It's up on the northern peninsula of Michigan. And then about the time Mark was in middle school, junior high, middle school, they moved back to California to the family house, where they stayed, the rest of his dad's career. And his mom was basically a stay-at-home mom. She had an architectural, she was an artist, so she had an architectural career when she was younger and before Mark came along. And but basically she was a stay-at-home mom, and she was fun. I met her a few years before she died, and she was quite the character. She looked just like Elizabeth Taylor when she was younger, the dark hair and everything, just beautiful. So Mark went to Drake High School here in San Anselmo. He went to Dominican University. He has degrees in history and political science, and he's got double bachelor's, double master's. He has a PhD in political science from USC. He was going to film grad school. He's been a filmmaker. He's been a publisher. He's always been a writer. He's had he has numerous talents and has had numerous career opportunities, because he's needed a lot of fronts for the top secret work that he went into. Oh, and so I have to say, he's had quite an interesting life. He has seen aliens and fairies and all kinds of interesting things from the time he was young. And when he was born, when he was 2 months old, there was a big UFO sighting here in San Rafael, and a large contingency of air or spacecraft flew over San Rafael and into there's a series of lakes and reservoirs near where I live, in the Marin Lake District, it's called. And if you've ever seen the movie Lion King, where they, celebrate the birth of the little cub and they hold him up for everybody to see, that's what happened to Mark with a bunch of raptor aliens, and we'll see a picture of a raptor later. But so he's had a whole birth celebration by aliens, and he has a scar on his wrist to prove it. I've seen it. They do a little blood brother thing. when he was in England, he got to go to events at the palace. He's been around the royal family numerous times. He used to have tea with the Queen Mother when she was alive, said she was a delightful woman, loved having tea with her. And so he knows Prince Philip, he knows Queen Elizabeth, he knows Charles somewhat. He knew Princess Diana a little bit from probably when she was very, very young. And he recalls one day, he used to go around a lot with his dad to different bases and things. And one of my favorite stories is that his dad had taken him to some secret base, and his dad was going to a meeting, and Mark was supposed to not get in trouble, but Mark was notorious for wandering off and getting out of sight from the airmen, and seeing what kind of mischief he could get in. Well, he was just having fun, so we'll just leave it at that. But he went into the code room, and this was 1960, 1961, I'm not sure which, but nobody knew where he was. And finally his dad found him, and he was kind of upset with him, and he said, well, Dad, they're talking about being on the moon and Mars right now, not sometime in the future, but right now. It's like, well, okay, but don't tell anybody you heard that. And Mark was really good at helping his dad test the security at all these different bases, because that was part of his dad's job. So that was one of the fun stories I love to tell about him. And another one was when they were in England, his dad was going to a secret meeting at a place called Charlicote Manor. It's near Stratford-on-Avon, and I've actually visited this manor. And Mark stowed away on a boat, and they didn't know he was there until everybody's getting out of the boat. And by that time, you have Admiral Mountbatten there, and all these politicians and all these military people. And by then it was too late to, you couldn't just send him back down the river to where they were staying. So he didn't get to go to the meeting, but he was at the manor, and he was, I remember he was, sorry, he was hiding in a room, and he knew somebody was in there. And he didn't know who it was, and I'm not sure if he really saw him very clearly, but it was a raptor, again, that I'll talk about a lot over the next many weeks. And then all of a sudden the raptor had left the room, and he saw this hooded figure walking to this tent where his flying saucer was covered up. And that was in 1962. And what Mark hadn't remembered was the year before that, he had met, this is Prince Naga. He had met Prince Naga as Mark was 7, going 8, because there had been an interstellar treaty conference in England, and Mark was there. Mark was playing with his kids, but at the end of the conference, they did a mind wash on him so that he wouldn't remember anything. And on another day, I'll explain more about the conference. But so the following year, when Mark saw Naga, he didn't remember him, and it's a painful memory, but he's starting to remember those kind of things. Okay, now let's see, Mark's military experience. He has been around military stuff his whole life, as I've said. He loved going to the officers' club. He learned how to swim at the officers' club pool. He loved to dance and sing the Air Force songs. And he was quite the character. I guess they used to bet on him that he could sing whole songs and whatever, but he was brilliant as a child. He's brilliant as a man, and obviously I adore him, especially for his intellect. And everything they did was top secret. So there's a lot of things I don't know, because I'm a need to know wife. And I always start all my talks with saying, telling people that he never divulges anything that will break his U.S. secrecy oaths. Now, he's been able to tell me a lot of things about his activities in the military and his father's activities and other people's, depending on what oath would have been involved at the time, or what agency he worked with, or maybe he can talk about the event but not his direct involvement. He's had access to, he's got a great memory, so he's had access to all of that. He's had access to friends' diaries. He's had access to military logs, human and alien logs, especially the Raptors. And he's just been able to access all kinds of information, and it's just pretty wonderful. And I have to say that, you know, both he and his father, because they were in military intelligence, they were involved with some pretty hairy stuff, and they were always in the thick of things. Another fun story, and it's not that I like to name drop, but Mark's been around. Like Ian Fleming, for example, taught him how to drive his Bentley when Mark was 8. Mark used to be babysat by like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis when they lived in England. His godfathers, and I don't know if I remember all of it. He has 3 or 4 godfathers. Admiral Nimitz was one of them. General LeMay, or Curtis LeMay, was one of his godfathers. I'm forgetting one. Sorry. But I also know that, you know, he knew very well Admiral Mountbatten. He worked closely with Prince Philip. So he's been around people in pretty high up stations and ranks. So he's seen a lot, done a lot. Going back to his father and his grandfather, his grandfather Richards worked on the Manhattan Project, and he was a leading expert in early spaceflight. His maternal grandfather worked with Tesla. Tesla had developed an engine that was used in some early airships that were tested over the United States, beginning in Northern California in the late 1800s. And Mark's grandfather Taylor was on that ship. He got off before it crashed, but you know, that had to have been pretty exciting. I know that for much of his career, Mark's dad was stationed here just north of me, about 15-20 minutes, is an former Air Force base, Hamilton Air Force Base in Novato, excuse me, and it was closed, I think, in the 70s. But I mean, it was a really famous base here on the West Coast, very important. We're going to talk about that more next week. But it had some secret stuff there. I mean, it was very famous. A lot of important missions left there during World War II. It was a strategic air command base. And then, like I said, they had a lot of secret stuff, but I'm going to save that for next week. So my nose is itching, and I can't remember what that means, but so excuse me if I have to scratch it every now and then. But like I said, I've seen Mark's dad's orders, probably all of his orders, and they all say restricted, top secret. I've seen several of Mark's military paperwork, and they all say top secret. He has the rank of a Navy captain. So I was gonna go back or talk about Mark's Navy career. He started out in like as a teenager, he did some elite Navy training. I know he went to Hawaii for some of it. He also was so smart that Lockheed had hired him while he was in high school to help them with numerous projects they were working on. And one in particular was a top secret sub called the Deep something. It just totally went out of my head. But the cool thing is, this submarine is now at a naval warfare museum up in Washington. So one of these days it's just sitting outside, and one of these days I am determined to go visit it. But so Mark's career, you know, as soon as he was out of high school, he joined the Army. He went to Vietnam. He was a chopper pilot. He probably went in as a lieutenant, came out as a captain, lateraled back over to the Navy. So he has the rank of a Navy captain. He probably immediately joined the Air Force Special Forces, which takes in all branches. So he was doing top secret stuff forever. I mean, he was even doing little errands for his dad, you know, checking security things when he was a toddler. In the early 70s, while he was in college, and probably after Vietnam, and then before he was doing some other stuff, he was sent to Chile as a courier for his dad, and he got caught up in the coup there. So he came back to college and, you know, like goes right to class. He's got, you know, bloody clothes, and, you know, he's got his knife and probably his gun, and he just walks into class and plops down. So he was quite the character, but people, you know, didn't seem to mind. And another thing when he was young, they lived here in San Anselmo. They lived in Dayton, Ohio for a while his dad was stationed at Wright-Patterson. And at the time he was working on his master's, but he was also, you know, doing whatever the Air Force was having him do, and I'm sure it had a lot to do with UFOs, because his dad, like I said, his dad was stationed everywhere UFO related. And so, you know, I know his dad was in the Philippines, and, you know, while people thought we were doing nuclear testing, there were actually, you know, wars going on with oceanic aliens and stuff. So hence the need for the nuclear stuff. Another thing about his dad was he was part of, his squad was called the men at Hamilton, the fighter pilots that he was part of, they were called the Fighter Mafia of Hamilton. And they were known for going, you know, especially when there was a UFO sighting or a crash, for example, Roswell, whatever. Even though I haven't seen any records that specifically say that he went to Roswell, but this squad of men, you know, they would have been the ones, because they were very elite, had very elite training. They were always called upon by international security and Majestic 12. And whenever an enemy needed to be stopped by air or space power, they were there. And I know in the early 50s, before Mark was born, there was a Operation Main Base in the North Sea. So there was a whole air battle with UFOs and the Royal Air Force, the British Royal Air Force. And I have copies of headlines that say, you know, our saucer was chased by an RAF jet plane. And our fighter mafia from Hamilton actually went and took part in that. And as they're coming back, you know, Mark's dad's plane is pretty well shot up, and it basically crashes as it's landing. And his mom is standing there watching this, and she's just, you know, barely newly pregnant with Mark. So right on the top of Mark's head is a blonde streak where his dad, you know, had his head injury from this really horrible crash. So he's still, well, he's has less hair than he did then. He's, you know, not happy about that, but he still has, it's definitely a different color of hair than, you know, the rest of his hair. So it's pretty cool. So, and I just keep repeating, I know they've been around secrets forever, and it's just amazing to me, and I am constantly in awe of what these men went through to protect Earth and humanity. It blows me away, because I remember, it's like in one of the space missions, one of the space battles I know they were involved with, you know, I'm on Earth in a church dance festival, not knowing what's going on in space above me, like most everybody else, because we weren't supposed to know, and we didn't know. And, you know, if these men, and it wasn't just the two of them, obviously, but if they hadn't have done what they did, you know, life for us would be totally different now, even if there was life. Another cute anecdote about Mark. When he was about 4, he was down at Edwards Air Force Base with his dad, and he was, I guess his dad was, you know, off flying something, and he was waiting near the airfield with Captain Gordon Cooper, the astronaut, and they were filming the aircraft, and Mark thought this aircraft that was coming in was his dad, so he was getting all excited, and all of a sudden it was the famous incident where it's actually a flying saucer or some, you know, some spacecraft that lands, and they're filming it, and then there's part of the story is that, you know, they took the film and they whisked it off to Washington, D.C., and Mark's dad was the person that whisked it off to Washington, D.C. So that was pretty cool. Now, another interesting story about Mark, and I'll spend a whole nother time talking about this. When he was 7 going on 8, there was an interstellar treaty conference held in southern England, based in Exeter, the whole Devon and Cornwall area. And as a 7-year-old, he got to be there, witness the opening ceremonies, the closing ceremonies. He was around several of the committee meetings, but the best part for him was that he got to play with several alien children of different kinds, a couple of reptilian children, raptor children, a gastrocell, a manta teenager. So, you know, he didn't take notes. His English girlfriend that was with him took notes and drew pictures, and Mark uses a lot of her diary entries for his notes now in all the writings that he does. And it's fascinating because he just had a ball playing with these alien children. So, what great experience for a 7-year-old. So like I said, he began his career as a teenager. He did some elite training. He went to Vietnam. From 72 to 86, no, 76 to 82, I get it mixed, yeah. 76 to 82 were his most intense military years. I know he was always involved, but 76 to 82 was probably back-to-back missions, whether it was on Earth or off planet. And I know of several off-planet missions he's been on. He's been in numerous space battles. He has been the captain of one of the ships for our deep space fleet that, you hear many people talk about the deep space program or the secret space program. And I can honestly say that Mark and his dad were part of that secret space program. And again, that, I'm just so proud to know them. And, one of the cool things for me is that when I go speak, especially when I'm speaking in England, Mark's dad's spirit is right there with me, behind me, holding me up, just giving me the strength that I need to carry on. And I have visited the USS Hornet several times, that's stationed in Alameda as a museum now. And it's a great historical ship. It's got World War II history, but it also has a lot of alien history. There's a lot of alien activity that had been on that while it was still commissioned, and then even when it was decommissioned, they used it for top secret missions. And I have been on there with a psychic, and even, well, I've been on there with a couple of psychics, and I've experienced ghost stuff myself. But again, Mark's dad is always there with me, and it's wonderful. So Mark, again, went on and did numerous missions, incredible stories he has to tell, and he's still revealing new stuff to me all the time. And it might not be happening right now, but there's so much to tell us of, what happened years ago. And the other cool thing that I love about him is that he still is in touch with a lot of people still in the know. So people think he's totally out of the loop, but he's not. Now, in 1982, he was arrested, and in 1984, he was convicted falsely for a murder that supposedly happened here in Marin County, pretty famous murder called the Pendragon murder. He had nothing to do with it. The kids who worked for him killed somebody and said he masterminded the whole thing. And at the time, he didn't think much of it. I mean, he had an alibi. I know he was off on a mission somewhere. He can't tell me about it. It's one of those, just one of those he can't talk about, or he'd get in worse trouble than he is now. But he's been in California state prison for over 30 years now. He was convicted in 1984, and the poor man's been in prison for over 30 years. And, more than half his life, because he was 29 when he was arrested. And I have to say, and again, we're going to do a whole show on what it's like to be in prison and visit prison and whatever. And if you've heard Carrie Cassidy talk about it, she's given you a glimpse, but I've been visiting him there for almost, 18 years. Yeah, we just hit our 18th anniversary. And it's a whole nother way of life. But so he has a life without parole sentence, which is lousy, and the prison system is lousy. and we keep trying new strategies. I am not giving up hope. We just keep trying. But the beauty, I guess, the one silver lining out of this whole situation is that he's decided to share and reveal some of the history that he knows and that he can share. And there are people in the military who want this information out, even though they can't share it themselves. And there's a lot of people in the New World Order who don't want it out. And what we've come to realize with his case is that there were probably actually, either if they didn't plan it from the beginning, the New World Order is totally behind him staying in prison. And let's see. So Rich has flown all kinds of aircraft, and like I said, he was a test pilot for the Air Force, and he's been in different movies. Like Howard Hughes did the movie Jet Pilot, and he and Chuck Yeager were flying new jets, like kind of as extras in the background. So that was fun for him. And in 1965 or 1966, he officially retired from the Air Force, and he took over a top secret agency called International Security. And this had been formed in 1947 by the United Nations, and Admiral Nimitz ran it until he died. And then Rich retired, officially from the Air Force, and he took over this International Security Force. And basically what it did was it took care of any threats on and off planet, and different countries would come together, different governments and militaries would come together to deal with, and he got to test various projects that Nikola Tesla was working on, like the death ray and just all kinds of stuff. And he grew up in Michigan, I believe. He went to school at Northwestern. He joined the Army Air Corps for World War II. He became a fighter. Well, he became a pilot, and he, as aircraft advanced, he became a fighter pilot and a test pilot for the Air Force. And he just had this incredible military career. But what a lot of people didn't know was that from the time he was a teenager, he was involved with all kinds of top secret missions and activities that his father would have been involved with. And he had been around aliens and just incredible secrets his whole life. And in fact, in the 30s, before Germany went to war, he was over in Europe for a wedding, I believe, and he was invited to Germany to check out all the cool secrets that the Nazis were developing, because they wanted him to defect and become a Nazi officer, and he politely declined, I'm sure, and took as many secrets with him as he could back to the United States. And he saw flying saucers, he saw jets they were working on, different aircraft, different ships. It's just incredible. And after World War II, he went in and out of the Air Force, but he was stationed all over the world, and usually he was stationed at places where there was UFO activity or conflicts with different alien species here on Earth. And I know that in 1959, he was stationed in Pakistan at a very top secret base, and for a while he was there maybe 6 months, and then I've learned that for about 12 months, he was off planet. And the whole time, Mark, my husband Mark, was about 5, 6, and he and his mom were basically, left home alone. But I mean, they had a lot of help, and they had a lot of friends, and their uncles had a lot of great connections. So they had some good experiences while their dad was gone. But of course, they missed him. And So we'll just get started. And if I could have the picture of Rich, the man in the Air Force uniform, that would be great. So my father-in-law's name was Major Ellis Lloyd Richards, and his grandfathers were both involved with Nikola Tesla. One worked with Tesla on various projects, and well, they both worked with Nikola Tesla on various projects. Major Richards' father was Ellis Lloyd Richards Sr., and he was a brilliant electronics engineer. He worked on many think tanks. He worked closely with the president. And because of his connections with Tesla and different scientists, he was able to get his son to have different summer camps with exciting scientists with Tesla and with Goddard and with Hubble, and just fascinating experiences. And Rich, as he's known by, and his military nickname is the Dutchman, he spent incredible summers with these men. Good evening and welcome. My name is Joanne Richards, and I am going to be your host for News and Clues from Earth Defense Headquarters, my nonprofit based here in Northern California, north of San Francisco. And tonight we are going to be talking about the Knights of the Cold War. Who are they? Who are these heroes from the Cold War? Basically the two main men in my life,